Okay, wow. Sorry, we had a bit of a technical problem here. Christian is not here with us and everything goes wrong. So I think we've got some solid evidence now that we need you, Christian. You can't just sit in the train somewhere. Okay, so thanks to all the participants for your patience today. Why don't we try to start as quickly as possible. So after running this show for 3 or 4 years, we finally have Matthijs Rooduijn as a speaker.
Is this really his first time?
Yeah, he's been extremely reluctant to...
Yeah, he was inviting other people on his own time.
I've never been invited.
No, you have been, but then you invited other people.
True.
Yeah, true. That's true, yeah.
It's indeed an example of true altruism. I just wanted to highlight today that you can't really see it well on our screen, but I want to highlight that the Hot Politics Lab logo, of course, has blue and yellow in its logo, and today, just today, we used that as an expression of sympathy towards the ongoing events in Ukraine, and our thoughts are, of course, with the people over there. And that all makes the proposed research that Matthijs will present today all the more relevant, of course, because we'll be talking about empathy and tolerance for refugees. And of course, I think all of the attendees are very familiar with Matthijs's extensive work on themes of populism and radicalism and all the joint work that we've done over the years. So I'm more than happy to give the floor to my longtime friend and collaborator, Matthijs.
Thanks, Gijs. I'm going to share my screen now. Whoop. Oh, 1 second. Can you now see it? Yeah. Okay. Well, thanks for inviting me, Bert and Gijs. It's an honor to be here. Unfortunately, I cannot be there with you because my girlfriend tested positive a couple of hours ago. And I'm also coughing a little bit, so I've decided to stay here. I am going to present what is basically a pre-analysis plan. So it's really we're just starting. Well, we're not just starting, but it's still pretty fresh. So all kinds of comments and suggestions are more than welcome. It is a project that is designed together with a couple of people. Debbie Gerritsen, who is my colleague from the Interdisciplinary Social Science program here at the UvA, where I teach, and Gijs and Bert, of course, my friends from the lab. We start from, our whole project starts from the observation that there are lots of worries about polarization. And when it comes to political preferences, or when it comes to cultural values, or when it comes to specific COVID-19 attitudes, there is this widespread impression that there is a lot of intergroup hostility. Well, there are good reasons to have this expectation, because when you look, for instance, at research in the United States, we see that there is a lot of negative feelings between the Democrats and Republicans. If you look at the United Kingdom, we see that Brexit has basically generated a completely new divide or cleavage in the British society. And also when we look at research on affective polarization in continental Europe, we see that there is a lot of intergroup hostility. So the question then basically becomes, how can we deal with this? How can we deal with this high level of animosity? And some people have argued that we need more empathy. For instance, our finance minister, Sigrid Kaag, she wrote an opinion piece, and there she said that we in the Netherlands need more empathy. And similarly, Barack Obama, when he was still a senator in the US, made a similar claim. He said that in the US there was an empathy deficit, and that was one of, according to him, one of the most pressing issues of his time. And also when we look at research, we see that we can see that empathy can indeed reduce prejudice. However, some people are more hesitant. They're actually more skeptical about a one-sided focus on empathy. And most importantly, they argue empathy can maybe work, but a negative element of empathy is that the radius is pretty limited. So empathy is most often only directed towards an in-group. And in fact, when concern for an in-group is high and there are threats to this in-group, it can lead to negative attitudes towards outgroups. And imagine that we can actually increase empathy with an outgroup. Even then, the question is how far it can reach, because we have to deal with boundaries to the moral circle. So there will always be groups that do not fall within this moral circle. And indeed, research has shown that when it comes to empathy, that the consequences can be more effective polarization. So a question therefore is it possible that empathy does more harm than it does good? So that's the point of departure for study. So we make three main contributions. So the first one is that we examine and compare different ways of inducing empathy, and we examine the political consequences. So there are some studies focusing on political consequences, but not many yet. And those that do focus on political consequences mainly focus on two-party systems and not on multi-party systems. More importantly is that we introduce tolerance as an alternative to empathy. Whereas empathy zooms in on a specific individual or group and creates an emotional bond with this individual or group, tolerance zooms out and focuses on society as a whole. So basically, tolerance is a more distant perspective. And some people say that it's a more rational one, focusing on mutual respect. And one could say that the core idea basically is that to live in a democracy and to live together in peace and harmony, it is of essential importance that we respect diversity, that we appreciate basically pluralism, social, political, and cultural pluralism. So only in this way can we all live together. And our question basically is if tolerance can work better to reduce intergroup hostility than empathy. And finally, and this is more of a methodological argument, we introduce a theater experiment. Which means that we are going to collaborate with directors, writers, actors, musicians, sound designers. And as such, we can really design very immersive treatments that form an immersive experience for participants. I will tell you more about it in a minute. First, I want to focus briefly on our core hypotheses, the hypotheses we have for now, because that still could change. The first set of hypotheses focuses on the effect of inducing outgroup empathy. So our expectation is that when we induce outgroup empathy, that this will lead to warmth or positive feelings towards this specific outgroup. However, because I've just told you, right, that often the radius of empathy is limited, we do not expect that this will also spill over to other outgroups, and that it will also not spill over to effective polarization for vote intentions, etc. So there will only be an effect on this specific outgroup. The second set of hypotheses focuses on in-group empathy. And here we expect that this will lead to less positive attitudes towards this specific outgroup, in particular when there is a situation of threat to the in-group, for the reasons I've just mentioned. And for this reason, we also expect that there will be a negative effect on positive attitudes towards other types of outgroups. We also think that it will spill over to the political realm. So for instance, we think that it also will affect effective polarization. So if you really strongly focus on empathy with the in-group, it can lead to more negative feelings towards outgroups, also when these outgroups are political. And finally, we also examine the radical right, so voting for the radical right. And we think that focusing on the in-group could increase a focus on the nation, and therefore also could lead to a more popularity of radical right politicians. Of course, as you can see here, when you look at the dependent variables, it moves from a group that is really close to the treatment to a group that is very far away from it. So we also think that the effects will will decrease when you go from the group very nearby to the group, from the variable very nearby to the variable further away. And finally, we look at tolerance. And here we have the exact opposite expectations compared to the in-group empathy group. So here we expect that inducing tolerance will lead to more positive feelings towards the specific outgroup, also to other outgroups, and that it will diminish in-group outgroup distance, effective polarization, and vote intentions for the radical right. I would like to emphasize that we're also going to explore other types of variables and other things. So we are going to examine to what extent different types of empathy induction have different consequences. We've also focused on different types of tolerance. We also look at the effect of intolerance. We're going to examine the effects on empathy and tolerance attitudes. We're going to examine whether there is a difference between receiving the information alone or in the group. And we're going to look at moderation by pre-treatment attitudes. But I will say more about that in a minute. First, the design now. We will team up with a musical theater company called Via Berlin, and we're going to investigate this at Oerol, which is basically a landscape arts festival. And for this festival, the whole island of Terschelling, which is one of the islands in the north of the Netherlands, is transformed into a natural stage for all kinds of artistic performances. Every year, there are about 50,000 visitors at Oerol. And we are going to, and it lasts for 10 days. We're going to perform 9 out of those 10 days. So we will have a 1-day break, and we will have 2 performances each day. We expect 400 visitors per performance, and this will lead in the end to 7,000 participants in our experiment. The whole thing, so the whole performance, consists of 3 parts. So the first part is our theater experiment. I'm going to talk about this experiment in a minute. It also consists of a musical theater performance. I'm not going to talk about that in depth. If you have questions about it, I'm happy to answer them. And we also have an interactive discussion with the audience as a final part. Here we debrief participants, and here we will tell them more about the experiment that we have just conducted. For now, I'm going to focus on the theater experiment itself. So what are we going to do? The context of the experiment is a fictitious story, and we are going to immerse people in this fictitious story, and it is about Belgium, our neighboring country. And the story is that in Belgium, there will be a civil war. There is really a civil war, a state of emergency, because groups within Belgium attack each other. And in particular, people with a migration background are under attack. And therefore, they seek refuge in the Netherlands. This is the general information that all participants in the experiment that will receive this information. Later on, they will be randomly divided over 4 different routes. And along these routes, they will be manipulated. So the experiment is basically in these 4 routes. And these 4 routes are literally routes. There are paths through the dunes, through the bushes that lead to the musical stage. The musical performance stage is located on top of the dunes, where people can sit, where they can watch the performance, and where they have a view over the sea and over the little town nearby. But the routes are the paths to this musical stage where the performance will. Along this path, people will be exposed to radio transmissions by means of speakers that are hidden in the bushes. So people will walk there and they will hear these fake, of course, radio transmissions, which really will sound like real radio transmissions. In the experiment, we will most likely have about 12 conditions, and that will randomly be divided over the performances. So we have 4 routes. We have 18 performances. That means that we will have 72 times a group walking up. And that again means that we will have, that every condition will be present 6 times. So if you have questions about this, let me know and I will try to answer them later. What does it look like? Every route consists of 2 parts. The manipulation part, that's where the people are exposed to the treatments, and then the question part. And in the question part, people will see billboards along the route with questions, thermometer questions about several groups, empathy questions, voting questions, all kinds of questions also about emotions. And they will use plastic cards where they will answer the questions with a pen, and these cards will be scanned at the end of the room. We're now also exploring whether it will be possible to use tags, so that we can use the tags to basically answer the questions. But we're still, we have to see whether the technique will allow us to do that. We will have 4 routes, as I've said, and each will have 3 subroutes. This means that it will take about 20 to 30 minutes for 400 people to go up. We have already tested this, and this should work. It should work, we think. But we will have 40 students, 4 interns, and 2 research assistants to help us. So we have actually lots of people to actually help us get the people up there. And this is what it looks like. Just that you get an impression. This is a map of the town, the little village where the people will arrive. They arrive here. This will be a tent. They can park their bicycle over here. Of course, it's a Dutch island, so people arrive by bike. And they will then walk here through this street to where the routes start. They will get colored wristlets, and they refer to the colored routes that they will walk up. Here you have an overview of, here is again where people are received, where the bicycles are parked, and here they have to walk here, and here they will split up, and the green, yellow, red, and blue routes are going to different areas, 100 people here, 100 people here, here, and here. And from there, they will walk up through the dunes. And that will look like this. So these are the locations again. And these are the routes. So we have 4 different routes, and each route has 3 different subroutes. Otherwise, we will not be able to get the people up within 20 to 30 minutes. Here will be the musical theater stage. It will be built over here. And people will arrive here, and they will answer the questions here and along the routes. So this is basically what it looks like. Here is the sea, and here is also the sea. So people here have will have very nice views. Okay, a bit more about the conditions. All people will be introduced to the fictitious situation in Belgium. And then we have now 6 conditions. We have an outgroup empathy condition with a personal story. So here we will tell people a personal story that really, with which we hope to induce empathy. We will have another group that will get the same treatment, including a perspective-taking exercise. And I will say more about it in a minute. We will do the same with the in-group empathy group, and we will also have a tolerance group. In the tolerance group, there will not be a personal story because, as I've said, with the tolerance condition, you really zoom out. It's a more distant perspective, so it can never be about a specific group or a specific person. We might want to add a perspective-taking exercise, but I'm not sure about it yet, but we will talk about it in a minute. And we will have a control group. All conditions are multiplied with 2 because we want people to receive information individually and in groups. And we want to see whether there is a difference between people receiving information when they're on their own, when they're walking through the dunes by themselves without talking to other people, or when they walk through the dunes and they can actually talk with their co-visitors about the information that they are receiving real time. Okay, so this is what we want to do at Oerol. However, we're going to do a pre-test soon this month with 1,200 respondents. And here we are basically going to experiment a little bit with the experiment. So we're going to try different things. And what I really want, sorry, what I would really like you to do is to really focus on the text I'm going to present you. So we're going to do this pre-test, and we really hope to get some information about all these different conditions. And this information can then help us to actually write the actual pre-analysis plan and to do the study at Oerol. So we're going to experiment a little bit most with the outgroup empathy condition. We will look at personal stories, different ways of perspective-taking exercises. And we will also experiment with different types of tolerance induction I will tell you, I will show you the text so you will see the difference. We will also experiment with an intolerance text to see if what the effects of an intolerance text are. So what I'm going to show you now is what we're going to do in this survey. So in this survey, we're going to expose people to text, whereas at Oerol, they will hear these texts. It will be more immersive. However, we want to test whether what we're going to expose people to might work. So I'm going to present you the text we have now. They're really brief, so we can go through it. I do need to mention that it was written in Dutch and that I've translated with Google Translate. That works really, really well, but there might be some language mistakes. The most obvious ones, I think I took care of that, but there might be some errors left. Okay, so first, within the survey that we're going to do next month, this is the information that all participants will read. So you're about to read 2 texts about fictitious situations. Try to imagine as vividly as possible what you are reading actually happened. Then answer the questions that follow. In Belgium, different groups live together. Imagine that the tensions between these groups continue to increase. Due to a rising nationalism in the country, people with a migration background are increasingly excluded. If at some point several attacks are perpetrated on immigrant-run supermarkets, a state of emergency is declared in Belgium. It is now a kind of civil war. Many people with a migration background no longer feel safe and decide to flee to the Netherlands. It's tens of thousands, maybe hundreds, 100 of thousands of people. So this is the introduction text and everybody will read this. Then the Outgroup empathy people will read this. Many people find it important that we offer help to these refugees in this situation. It is terrible what is happening to them, and there are so many innocent victims. Many Belgians with a migration background no longer feel safe and are at their wits' end. From a human point of view, we have to sympathize with these Belgians. They are in a crisis situation that we can hardly imagine, and they desperately need our help. So we already did a test with this text, and it has no effect at all. So we thought that we needed to spice up things a little. So we added a personal story in the second group. So people will read this text, and in addition to it, they will read this. Read below the story of 8-year-old Jana, a girl with a migration background who has lived in Belgium all her life. My dad was very badly injured in an attack in our store. There are people who threaten us because they don't want us to live here anymore. I don't understand what we did wrong. Now we have to leave the place where I've lived all my life and where all my friends live, and we may never come back here. So this is the second condition. People read the empathy text and they will read this personal story. In the third group and the fourth group, we use perspective-taking exercises. So the first one, group 3, we would like to ask you to close your eyes for a moment and imagine what it would be like to be in Jana's shoes. What would she think and feel? Write down 3 words that come to mind. This is the imagine other perspective. In the fourth group, we will ask a very similar but slightly different question. We would like to ask you to close your eyes for a moment and imagine how you would think in Jana's situation and how you would feel. Write down 3 words that come to mind. This is an imagine self perspective-taking exercise. So here we're going to compare also these different types of perspective-taking exercises. Okay, that's the Outgroup empathy. Now the Ingroup empathy text. The fifth group will get this text, also including a personal story. The Dutch Housing Association is sounding the alarm with regard to the housing shortage in the Netherlands. This leads to distressing situations every day. There are currently no fewer than 60,000 people who do not own a home. That is an increase of 100% compared to 5 years ago. From a human point of view, we must empathize with our fellow citizens. They are in a crisis situation that we can hardly imagine, and they desperately need our help. Read below the story of 8-year-old Sarah, a Dutch girl who lives alone with her father because her mother has passed away. My daddy no longer has a job and can no longer afford our house. That means that we have to get out of the house where we've lived all our lives. We have not yet been able to find another house because there are simply too few houses. My daddy doesn't know what to do anymore, and that makes me very sad. So Here we want to increase empathy with the in-group. In a first trial, we have basically, we linked this in-group empathy to the situation in Belgium. However, that makes almost by definition the whole text sounding like a radical right treatment. And therefore we have decided to present a text that is completely different from the first text. And we do not think that this is strange, because when people walk through the dunes, you have to imagine they will be exposed to these different messages, like they're listening to a news item. And also in a news item, of course, you have very different items. So it might be realistic to have a completely different story next to it. So here we want to increase in-group empathy. We then also do a similar thing where we add also a perspective-taking exercise. We do not do both perspective-taking exercises, because otherwise we will have not enough respondents within our different groups. Okay, then the tolerance group. We focus on 3 types of tolerance. The first one is acceptance of diversity tolerance. And this is the text. Many people think we should be more tolerant. We can only live together in freedom and peace if different population groups respect each other. The big problem in Belgium now is the lack of tolerance, and that is where the solution should be found. As long as they don't harm each other, all groups should be free to live as they please. So this is basically accepting diversity. It's a relatively negative understanding of tolerance. The second type of tolerance is called respect for diversity. And there we add one extra line. We say, and that is ultimately only possible if different groups respect each other, even if they do not agree with each other. So this basically goes one step further. It's not just acceptance of diversity, it is respect for diversity. And in the third one, we add appreciation for diversity. And here we add diversity of traditions and lifestyles should be welcomed. Diversity only makes a society stronger. So this is again one step further. And then in a 10th group, we add to these texts, again, a perspective-taking exercise. Of course, when it comes to tolerance, we cannot ask people to position themselves in the shoes of another person, because tolerance zooms out, right? So here we have the following text. We would like to ask you to close your eyes for a moment and imagine what it would be like if all groups in our society would respect and tolerate each other. Write down 3 words that come to mind. And then we have an intolerance text. Many people think that we should draw a line here. We already have enough problems in the Netherlands and cannot have these refugees here. If we take in all these people from non-Western countries, we will betray our own citizens who are already having a hard enough time. Moreover, these people do not fit in with our Dutch culture at all. If we now open the borders, the Netherlands will increasingly change into a country that does not belong to the Dutch. This is where it really has to stop. The border should close. So this is a real radical right message. And finally, we need a control condition, a text that is basically completely not related to any type of empathy, tolerance, or intolerance. And we still have to design that. So if you have any ideas, let me know. So to conclude, all the texts I've just presented are going to be part of a survey. We're still, it's not final yet, so we can still change it. The outcomes of this survey will then help us to formulate our pre-analysis plan. And that will, of course, be the pre-analysis plan for Oerol. So this is really, we can really still change a lot. So all your ideas are more than welcome. And finally, I would like to mention that, of course, the whole situation, the war in Ukraine has changed, the environment. So my question would also be, do we need to take that into account, and how? Because of course we have no idea how things are going to change, in particular when it comes to refugees. Thanks.
Matthijs, do you hear us?
Yes, I can now hear you.
Oh,
Yeah.
now you missed all the compliments about the work, so I'm not going to redo that. No, thanks a lot. It's great to see you talk this through, and especially some compliments on the art with all the. Now that we're looking at a lot of military maps these days, it's also nice to see some walking routes again, and not just
There are zones of control.
Yeah, exactly. So, hey, for people who are maybe a little new to this hybrid format, if you have a question, you can type it in the Q&A box, and then I will read it out loud, and Matthijs will answer the questions. Hey, Matthijs, before so people might want to formulate their question, I have a quick question for you, Matthijs. So, how do you think the developing situation in Ukraine will affect some of the treatments that we might see, right? We have a lot of empathy induction here, and there's also group dynamics here, in a sense that you know, compared to maybe the last refugee crisis in Europe, it definitely seems like countries like Hungary are suddenly very willing to adopt refugees, at least for now, at the time, early March. So is this a worry you have, and especially in terms of maybe pre-treatment effects, that we get constant exposure to empathy-inducing messages? Or do you, well, I'm not asking you to predict the future, but should we worry about this?
Yeah, I'm a bit worried about it, because I'm worried about the situation, of course, but this is really, I think that what might happen here is that people in general will be much more positive about refugees than before, and this might affect the results, because it could be now that if people talk about when people think about refugees, they think about people from Ukraine leaving the country and seeking refuge here in the Netherlands. And we know that we are all pretty welcoming to these refugees. And that it was really, really different before the war broke out. And in particular in 2016, when we had this other so-called refugee crisis. But of course, we don't know how things are going to develop right now. It could be a massive influx of refugees, maybe not. I expect that to happen actually, but we don't know. And we don't know how public opinion is going to develop. So I'm really not sure if we at this stage should change anything, because we really don't know what's going to happen. But I'm happy to answer all your questions, but I would also really like to hear all your suggestions, because I really don't know yet. So if you, Matthijs, or other people in the audience have any ideas, I would be really happy to hear them.
Yes, and Natalie Giger here in the room in Amsterdam had a follow-up question on the.
No, I actually have a suggestion.
Oh, a suggestion.
Because I mean, you mentioned so it's really really exciting work, and I have some other comments, but just on this, so you're quite abstract in saying they're in groups in Belgium with migration background, and that could evoke rather various kind of, you know, people could imagine various groups, and probably this will potentially change also in due course. So I was wondering if it might make sense to be a bit more specific there I mean, it seems that you want to induce empathy with specifically probably groups that have not seen so much empathy. So maybe it makes sense to tell them that, you know, Moroccan background or whatever they.
Yeah, good point. We have been struggling with this. So in a previous version, actually, what is going to happen at Oerol at some point, the whole musical theater performance is about the situation where there's been a coup in Flanders, and there is a nationalist group, and they took power, and they are now basically and there are attacks on Wallonians and also on immigrants, and people are there are huge numbers of refugees close to Maastricht. So this is the situation where the musical theater company starts. However, the whole coup idea was difficult because when you sketch that situation, people will be really negative about this group, probably about this far-right nationalist group, and that creates a clear outgroup, namely this far-right group, and we don't really want people to be really negative and to focus on this group. And for that reason, we have now decided to be relatively vague about what happened. So there is this civil war, there is this, there is a lot of nationalism, there is this emergency situation, the civil war. So there's a lot of stuff going on, but we are pretty vague about what is exactly going on. But that was our choice. That was something we wanted to be a bit vague about that. But I'm also not really sure if that is the best way to go. But we could be more specific and be more specific about the coup, because that will also be part of the story. But now I was a bit hesitant about it also because in a previous meeting where I presented this, people were, and I think rightly so, worried about this different outgroup that we create by focusing on this coup.
Okay, thanks, Matthijs. There are a couple of questions in the chat, so let's go to these. The first is from Diamantis Petropoulos-Petalas. Thank you, Matthijs, for sharing this super exciting research project. We all look forward to the next steps. My question is about various types, levels of empathy, and which type is likely to be targeted given your design. Psychologists often refer to cognitive, emotional, and compassionate forms of empathy that perhaps involve the activation of very different underlying mechanisms, leading to very different manifestations of emotion. Have you thought about pre-testing the type of empathetic response that maps best on the emotion you mostly want to target, and how to account for such differences in empathy activation in your analytical plan, using, for example, random intercept models? Many thanks, Diamantis.
Thanks. Yeah, so I think we do a couple of things that might help us to do something with this and to use this in our final experiment. So we are going to ask people about different types of empathy. So we ask questions about more cognitive elements of empathy, but also more affective elements of empathy. So we ask questions. I haven't mentioned it now in the slides, but we will, as another group of dependent variables, we will ask people's empathy attitudes, and there we can make this distinction between these more cognitive and more affective types of empathy. At the same time, we're also going to ask people about their emotions. So several types of negative and positive emotions, and they're going to answer how they feel after having been exposed to these treatments. So we can also say more about how they feel. So I think that these emotions will play an important mediating maybe role in this whole process, but we're still a bit agnostic about how exactly these emotions play a role. So I think this will be more, this part of the research will be more exploratory. Also, by the way, we will, for a very tiny subgroup of respondents, we hope to measure their physiological responses by means of wristlets that are going to measure their arousal. So these are ways in which we will try to disentangle this very important puzzle that you raise here. Thanks.
Okay, thanks. Next question is from Patrick Stewart. This is a fascinating project. Having done some field experiments, I congratulate you on taking such a challenging and promising study. With the groups, are you planning to apply any ethological observational methods? And in particular, Patrick, I have an idea about this. You could come to Oerol and sit hidden in the dunes and observe some of the facial muscle activity. Then if you're hereby invited to come in June to Texel or Terschelling. Come to the right island. But Matthijs, you might have something more to say about this.
Yeah, so we have many different plans. So this is what I've just presented is the core of what we're going to do. So I've just mentioned that in addition, we will do some other things. So we're going to explore these discrete types of emotions, also by means of questionnaires. And we're going to explore, as I've just mentioned, by means of these wristlets, their physiological responses. In addition, and I think these are the most important methods, but in addition, we will also do some qualitative research, and how exactly we do not know yet. But we will have 40 students there. It will be part of a course they take. What are you doing, Gijs, with the camera? 40 students will join us there, and they're going to do a research project, and they're also going to observe how people behave, and they're going to do interviews with respondents. So, for instance, we want to know more about, I'm not exactly sure yet how, but we want to know more about how people interact in the when it comes to the routes where people are allowed to interact. So as I've said, right, I haven't focused on it in detail, but we're going to make this distinction between people who receive information individually and people who receive information in groups. So people who can actually talk to each other when they receive the information. And I think, of course, if we find a difference, we know that interaction matters, but we do not know what really matters. And I don't think that we will be able to settle this question, but it might be worth it to try to, at least to some extent, explore what people are doing when they are talking to each other. So there, our students will probably play an important role and see what's actually going on, and they will also interview respondents. Yeah, so that's the additional things, the additional methods we're going to use to investigate this all.
Thanks, and Matthijs, apologies for disturbing you with the camera.
No.
I figured out that you did a good move. Anyways, Patrick has accepted the challenge to come and accept facial muscle activity. Cool. And as a little addition to it, may I suggest measuring observable audience responses, which is applause, laughter, etc. I think, that.
Yeah, by the way, sorry, just to add, so I have focused now on the theater experiment, which takes place before the performance. We will also ask questions and measure physiology during the and after, just after the musical theater performance. So there we can also indeed we can also examine indeed the ways in which people respond to the musical theater performance. Sorry, that was what I wanted to add.
Okay, yeah, great. Then we go to the room to Sanne van Ooster, who is here in the back.
Hey, hi, back here.
Hey, Sanne.
Hi, nice to see you. I hope you don't get sick, and I hope your girlfriend doesn't get sick as well. I really like your presentation. I already saw bits of it here and there. I just couldn't imagine what it was going to be about. And now I finally know, and it's just really exciting. And I think it's really amazing that you're taking this on. And I'm really looking forward to hearing about following how it develops. Something I really liked is your distinction between empathy and tolerance, because the moment you started talking about tolerance, all these red flags went off in my mind, and I just kept thinking, wait, what does tolerance mean? Because tolerance implies something negative is going on, but you have that covered with all those different conditions. It's really, really fascinating, really great. And also, I wanted to reply to this changes everything now that all of a sudden the refugee situation is totally different than it was a week ago or a week and a half ago. It actually, I think it does help. I would really urge you to be more specific about what kind of migration background you mean and what kind of where people are from, who they are, because and this is also something that in my dissertation I think about a lot, is about on what grounds are people justifying xenophobia? So whenever people say, well, we can't let these refugees in because of our housing market, is housing really what they're worried about? Or is it that it's kind of a justification that sounds okay, that makes them seem like reasonable people? So I really like that you're using the housing market as well as this reason why, but I would really urge you to get into, is it because of housing or is it because of race that people are worried, and just be specific about which migration background. and which
Yeah.
migration, where the people are from. Yeah. And
Thanks.
also think about there's a literature about single outgroups and double outgroups. You could say that like Ukrainian refugees you could argue they're a single outgroup, like they're from a different country, they have a different culture, but they're still white, and maybe more Christian oriented. But then a double outgroup is a group or a triple outgroup, speaks a different country and is not white and might be Muslim. I mean, all those things make you way more of an outgroup. So there's outgroups and there's outgroups.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, these are really, really good points. And I think it was something we have already discussed before. So should we actually focus on a very specific group? We're focused on Wallonians, but that's for reasons of the play, it's not possible. We've talked about other types of groups, but in particular now with the current situation and the associations people will have with refugees, it might be a very good idea to make the group more specific and to focus. And indeed, actually what we want to, I guess, is designing an outgroup that people really feel as an outgroup. And that might and then it might be the case to have actually these double or triple outgroups, and we can relatively easily, of course, design it like that and make the story be about a triple outgroup. And then it has and yeah, we could also now experiment already a little bit with it and try to see if it makes a difference if we are going to focus on such a triple outgroup or the situation in which we leave it open what kind of migrant group it is. But this is something that we should be more specific about in particular now. Thanks.
Okay, now we're
I'm sorry.
Now we're going to go to some questions from Canada. First, it's Amanda Friesen, but there was another suggestion from an anonymous attendee to also be specific about the outgroup, so that I think we've covered. Amanda has a question. I like this immersive version that is similar to Simonovic et al.'s 2017 perspective-taking video game study about Romania. Romani, sorry, prejudice. Their control treatment was naming an emotion on a face before playing the placebo game. I wonder if you could write a small vignette just about how people feel when watching theater performances. So it's about emotion, but not groups.
So this would then be interesting. So this would then be about the performance itself, right? So this would be about people seeing the performance and then writing. Yeah, I really need to. I really have to think about that. There, it will be mostly about emotions, I think. Yes, but this is something I really don't know yet. Also because it is tricky because, of course, what is happening in the play is something that we cannot really control, and a lot of things are going on there. So I think that in particular here, so I think I agree, if I understood it correctly, that this should be more about emotion, because it's really difficult to isolate what's going on in the play when it comes to the different groups. It is possible, of course, to investigate more in particular what is going on emotionally, and we could ask people to write that down, for instance, and to measure their physiological responses. But I think you're right, this will be more about the emotions and less about the effects of different types of groups. I'm not 100% sure if I understood what you meant, but yeah, thanks.
All right, the next question is also from Canada. It's from Jordan Mansell. Hi, Jordan, and also hi, Amanda. Empathy is a difficult emotion to induce. Jamil Saki shows that empathetic experiences in the target group are contingent on the relationship with the requester recipient. The implication of this relationship is that in experimental attempts to induce empathy, only a subset of your participants will actually experience empathy in response to the treatment. This may present a challenge to your design to compare the effects of empathy versus tolerance. What measures of empathy are you planning to incorporate to ensure you're actually capturing empathy? Your study might actually be better set up as a comparison of perspective taking versus tolerance.
Yeah, good point. So we will probably use the IRI measure of empathy. So the 4 different elements. What is it? Empathic concern, perspective taking, fantasy, and I'm missing one. These are it's a pretty long measure. So I think it's 40 items in total. So probably we're not going to be able to use the whole scale. I've discovered that we also have briefer scales. So I think 12 item scales of empathy, also the 4 different elements of empathy. So I think we're going to use that to measure empathy among respondents. And that we're going to use, there's also this validated measure of tolerance, also consisting of the 3 types of tolerance that I've just presented, right? So the appreciation, respect, and acceptance of tolerance. And I think we're also, this is a measure of, I think, only 9 items. So I think we're going to use the abbreviated IRI measure and this tolerance measure to actually measure people's attitudes. And indeed, to some extent, what we're focusing on is perspective taking versus tolerance. However, I would like to emphasize that we do this perspective taking exercise in some of the groups, but in some of the other groups, we only present an empathic text and a personal story. So there the situation is slightly different. But again, just like with the Amantis question, we need to disentangle the different effects here. But thanks, this is really helpful. I don't know this study of Jamil Saki, so I should also look it up. Thanks.
Well, you're going in isolation, so you have some time to read. You have to take care of the kids, right? Next question from Tobias Horbach. I was wondering about the control condition. Maybe one approach would be to have the radio emissions mimic some sort of podcast about cultural or historical background of Belgium to prepare them for the play without zooming in on any of the current groups.
These endings have mind.
Belgium to prepare them for the play. Yeah, so just a historical story about Belgium, that might be a good idea. The thing is, we have to be very careful that the control group does not trigger any empathic or any kind of tolerant or intolerant reactions, I guess. So I was also wondering about, of course, all people will see the very basic text about the situation. About not adding an additional text at all, but I'm not really sure about that because not adding a text is also can have an effect that I have just seen much less than the others. So I'm not really sure. This might be a good idea to focus on, basically just the background. Thanks.
Okay, last 2 questions from the room. First, Natalie Giger.
I just on this last, I'm not sure that showing a text on history of Belgium would still evoke some Outgroup feelings, no? Because they, but but on this, so first, on this point with the not showing a text, I was slightly worried that you kind of add always to the condition. So the first condition gets a much shorter text, and then kind of you always add. So the effect could also just be due to seeing or hearing more, no? So I would be and on the mind and background, I'm not sure how you want to set it up, but you could also experiment with some accents, no? That the story of this 8-year-old is told by a 8-year-old with a migration background or something. That would be quite cool. And then another a point on the very on the hypothesis setup, I was wondering how you then in the end measure effective polarization, because that seems I mean, you have one time shot, one snapshot of these respondents. So would you then just expect that the group itself is more polarized or more extreme? So I was wondering if polarization is really the right word there, or if it's more just extremeness or something.
Yeah.
But this is, I think, something to think through if setting up the pre-analysis plan, how this could be measured. Yeah. Yes, that's it. But
very good points. I think I will be very brief because we don't have much time. We don't have time left. Thanks for all the advice. I do hear your concerns about the different length of the text or radio transmissions. That is something that we should carefully think of. Effective polarization, very briefly. We look at the distance between one's in-group and out-group for several groups. When it comes to effective polarization, this is about how people think about their own voters of their own political party and voters for other political parties. In the United States, of course, it's a distance basically between the Republican and Democrat voters. In the Netherlands, we have many parties, so we have to take that into account. And we have, on the individual level, when it comes to these ideas about parties or voters of parties, there are measures that are developed that take that into account and also take into account how big these parties are. So that will be a measure that we will use there. I hope that answers that last question. Thanks.
Finally.
Yep, thanks a lot, Matthijs. I will quickly round up today because you already have a coffee mug with our politics lab on it, and announce the remaining schedule to you next week. Jif Lelkus from the Edinburgh School of Communication will give a talk titled Dynamic Media Bias. March 18, Josh Keller from Yale University will give a talk on the manifold effects of partisan media on viewers' beliefs and attitudes. It's a field experiment with Fox News viewers. I mean, that's almost as cool as what you proposed. Then the week after that, we have a Graduate Friday with Isabella Rabasso and Ernesto de Leon. And Isabella will present a paper titled Interest, Not Political Knowledge, Drives Emotional Responses to Politics. And Ernesto's talk is called Walking Roads to Hyper-Partisan News, Online Intermediaries to COVID-19 News During the Outbreak of the Pandemic. Then the week after that, April 1st, Rune Slothus from Oerol University, What's in the Queue? How citizens use party queues to learn about policies. And then after we have a bit of a long break with conferences and holidays and other stuff. Okay, thanks a lot for today. I'm sorry for the technical hiccups. Hopefully next week, Christian will be here again to save us from any more of those. And for now, I wish you a great weekend.